Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast brought to you by Bangalore International Centre, where we present conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
Let me start by a set of disclaimers. I'm a Gujarati and we always believe in playing safe. So, disclaimers are very necessary, right? The first disclaimer is I'm not a Gandhian. Like many people in the audience know that to be a Gandhian or to be an associate of Gandhi or to be eligible to be an inmate of ashram in Sabarmati, the person was required to follow 11 vows that Gandhi had prescribed. And when I was a student in a government school in a Mofusil town in South Gujarat, we used to sing this prayer of Satya Hinsa Chori Na Karvi on daily basis, right? It's a different matter that our teachers didn't tell you what the prayer meant, right? But still, so the last line of that prayer is very significant, and the prayer says that "E agyar mahavrat samji namra pane drad achava." So consider those 11 great vows and follow them with humility and firmness. Over the years, I've realized that I neither have the humility nor the firmness to follow even the half of those 11 vows with any measure of consistency or honesty, right? So that's the first disclaimer. Second disclaimer is I'm not a Gandhi scholar. So whatever little I know about Gandhi's life, his values, his presence in the emotional world of Gujaratis and Indians at large comes from the wonderful work that Professor Ram Guha has done, or my friend Tridip Saharud has done, or like Uma Dhupelia and Vinay Lal and so many of them, right? So I'm not a Gandhi scholar, so that's a second disclaimer. So who am I then? I am a common man, a simple middle class person who has just happened to finish the translation of a book in which Gandhi is an overarching presence. I'm also a person, a common man who is worried most of the time about my post retirement financial planning. But I'm also worried about the kind of the country that I will leave behind for my daughter to live in, flourish in, etc. So the question is that there have been hundreds and thousands of books on Gandhi, right? Where is the need for one more book? So I think the third disclaimer would be this book is not a book on Gandhi. It's not a book on Gandhi. And the author Prabhudas Gandhi, who is Gandhi's grandnephew, writes in a preface that, and he presents to us a very sort of edgy and educative dilemma about the genre of the book. He says that I can't call this book an autobiography because I've not done anything in my life to deserve an autobiography, right? So I'm such a simple, such an insignificant person that I cannot write an autobiography at this age. He was 22 then. Then he says that I do not have the discipline and the rigor of a historian to be able to, or even to think about attempting an autobiography or a biography of Mahatma Gandhi or Maganlal Gandhi, or a story of Satyagraha, or a sort of account or a story of Phoenix settlement, etc. etc. Right? So he clears all those grounds very efficiently. Finally, he says that this book is at best a Purana, and he calls it Phoenix Purana. Now, I think this is a very brilliant move on the part of the author, because in different traditions of Purana, we have got one Purana called Sthala Purana, right? So Phoenix is a place, and he calls it a Sthala Purana. Now, Sthala Purana, as the name suggests, weaves in legend, symbolism, lore about the origins and traditions of a particular place considered sacred by the people. generally a temple, but at times the place is also a river or a mountain, and it goes on like a town or village. So, at a time in our country when people are all hung up about the sthala of temples in different parts of the country and all concocted legends about those sthala, I think Prabhudas Gandhi prods us to think about an alternative idea of a temple which is the Phoenix settlement, where Gandhi undertook experiments in truth and nonviolence, right? And this was the kind of the truth which crossed the boundaries of place and time. So the truth that Prabhudas Gandhi presents to us is a truth which talks about certain normative human values which cut across different sthala and different samaya, right? So uh, that was a third disclaimer, and I think now the question that I need to respond to is, why should you buy this book or why should you read the book, right? And for that, I think I have written a small statement, and I think I would like to read the statement to you because while talking extempore, I might sound incoherent. Being a poet, I have a tendency to jump from ideas to ideas. So, in the interest of comprehensibility, let me read this statement out to you. The statement is divided into four sections. Of course, the statement is grounded in the book itself, right? So, I'll be quoting and drawing ideas from the book, but it also transcends the textual limit of the book, and it also talks about the contemporary India and the social and political situation we are living in. So the talk is divided into four parts, and the first part is Phoenix as an antidote to the pandemic of desire, right? And you'll come to know when I talk about this different section in detail. And the second section is Phoenix as an antibody to the virus of otherization. And third section is Nai Talim, a new pedagogic vaccine. And the fourth is Indian opinion, truth in the post-truth era, right? So please bear with me as I read this statement out to you. Generally, people like me don't get a chance to make a statement, right? So I think I got this platform and I should make the statement, make the best use of it. So the first part, Phoenix, an antidote to the pandemic of desire. At the onset of COVID-19, Arundhati Roy imagined the pandemic as a portal, a gateway between one world and the next, and whether we can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks, dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or, she continues, we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world. Unquote. While Roy sees the virological pandemic as grounded in the geomorphological agency of humans and the transformative global modernity sustained by neoliberal order, she also draws attention to the threat of the pandemic of masculine majoritarian ethno-nationalism, which would determine the forms of human belonging and contours of communities' futures. Reading The Dawn of Life, one realizes that pinning COVID 19 to global capitalist economy would amount to treating the symptom of the disease at the expense of its root cause, which is the infection of desire. For Gandhi knew that the self-renewing nature of unsaturated desire was a capitalistic axiomatic, which thrived on its contradictions like inequality, ecological degradation, and sacrificed individual freedoms. Hence, his apocalyptic prognosis about 300 million Indians taking to Western style industrialization, stripping the world bare like locusts. I'm referring to Gandhi's quote from Young India from 1928. Today, India is a nation of 1.46 billion, being advised to be aspirational and consume more. Consumption has become a dream, individually nurtured and neoliberally nationalized. Phoenix becomes a formalization of Gandhi's desire to cure himself of the disease of Western civilization that had secretly gripped him. The idea of founding Phoenix, in Gandhi's own telling, was triggered by his overnight reading of Ruskin's Unto This Last on board a train from Johannesburg to Durban. However, Prabhudas Gandhi notes that he was toying with the idea a good 8 days before he had read the book. On his visit to Tongat, where the small orchard right behind the family shop took his fancy and led him to wonder, and I quote, rather than wasting one's life under the strain of shopkeeping, wouldn't it be more gratifying to procure bigger piece of land and engage full time in agriculture? Quote. Instructively, the futility of life of shopkeeping later assumes trenchant overtones in Hind Swaraj, where the editor concurs with Napoleon, describing the English as the nation of shopkeepers. In a recent book, Gandhi's African Legacy, Uma Dhupelia has shown how Phoenix was a cooperative community built on the ideas of Ruskin and Tolstoy, where the life of an agriculturist was held superior to one in the city where factories bred large scale poverty and riches for a few. The community life at Phoenix was driven by the principle of aparigraha, non possession. For capitalism not only turns citizens into consumers, but it develops a military industrial complex and justifies it by identifying dangerous enemies within and without. In the memoir, Prabhudas Gandhi recalls the train journey he undertook from Phoenix to Durban during the strike of white employees of the Union Railways. And I quote, so the context here is that the white employees of the Union Railway are on strike and all the negotiations with the government fail. So they take to violence, they derail the trains, they set them on fire, etc., etc. So in order to safeguard the trains, the government deploys the army along the railway tracks, right? So Prabhudas is traveling by one of these passenger trains, and I quote him: "The image of an army guarding railway tracks, as if they were as precious as gold or even more, drilled it into my head that the demonry of mammoth machines and gigantic factories could not exist without constant protection by a fattened, heartless army. Without such a guard, it would spiral out of human control. If the machines blessed us with a plethora of leisure, they also forced upon us the crushing burden of a violent military force, fattening by the day at the expense of the human body, mind, and resources. Once the giant net of the military expanded in direct proportion to the spectral army of machinery, there was no way out of this double bind." Unquote. In Gandhian metaphysics, desire always begets violence, be it a desire to conquer nature or a nation or sexual desire. His experiments in brahmacharya and dietetics are to be seen in this larger frame of reining in desire to undertake seva and satyagraha. The way he locates severe dietary restrictions against the backdrop of the desire, and I quote, to fit in with the crores of poor people who often went on empty stomachs or survived on just one meal of thin gruel daily, unquote, is ingenious and fascinating. How can one frame this abjuration of desire if not as a precondition to cosmopolitanism? Second section: Phoenix antibodies against viruses of otherization. The way the biopolitics of nationalism, the bogey of Islamophobia, and the politics of caste class inequities conditioned the neoliberal state's response to the pandemic is a matter of hideous history now. In India, the pandemic laid bare disturbing contexts of the experience of migration, precarity, invisibilization, increased domestic violence, atrocities against Dalits, and mediatized misrepresentations of a community captured in crazy expressions like Corona Jihad. But the response of the state, on the other hand, was typically neoliberal, represented through the agenda of deregulation, weakening job security, and bargain legislations. Such a scenario comes about on account of the blunting of the privileged subject's desire and ability to access and experience the other's everyday social world, something which produces fear and resentment so central to any ethno nationalist project. The Dawn of Life is apparently an account of the dauntless fight Gandhi had led against racist colonial government in South Africa. But it also inheres a powerful self-reflexive gaze. Prabhudas Gandhi's response at the end of the chapter titled Satyagraha in Durban Tram, which provides an account of the racial humiliation and violence he had faced on a tram, is extremely poignant and pertinent. I quote, "The purist and racist attitudes of the whites pale into insignificance against the horrible casteism practiced in India. Not being allowed to occupy a seat on a tram drove us to feel being reduced to the status of animals. What trauma do our untouchable brethren would be going through when we don't allow them, for example, access to water tanks during scorching summers or an entry into a temple? If the use of adjectives like heartless, arrogant, and uncivilized for our white brothers in Durban seems justified to us, what kind of adjectives would be deemed suitable to describe us in India?" Unquote. Gandhi had made it a quintessential part of his project to expose his ideal community to the experience of caste, religious, and gendered socials having dissimilar moral, material, and aesthetic significations. For he knew that the necessary decolonization and desacralization of the self could be achieved only by a visceral politics of 1. Ontological inhabitation, 2. Role reversal, and 3. Discursive infection. By subjecting himself and the ashram inmates to the act of sandal making and toilet cleaning, Gandhi had overturned the conceptual premise of a caste universe that deemed a physical engagement with the materiality of the world, that is, the act of touch, as inherently polluting. Negotiating leather and shit, which are the low caste vocations in caste imagination, sought to enact an epistemic break in the high caste Hindu psyche, organized around stringent codes of purity and pollution. The Dawn of Life is strewn with examples of how Gandhi subverted gender hierarchies at Phoenix, primarily through the instrument of role reversal. After his return to Phoenix in 1913, Gandhi takes charge of the school and the kitchen as the headmaster and the head cook. On September 16, 1913, when the final Satyagraha flagged off and 16 Satyagrahis, led by Kasturba, set off to challenge an apartheid state, Gandhi personally cooked a luxurious send-off feast for them, consisting of roti, kheer, fragrant spicy curry, colorful salad, date juice, curry, rice, and so on. In fact, the act of placing 4 women, Kasturba, Kashiben, Santokben, and Jakiben, at the vanguard of Satyagraha was Gandhi's strategic blow on calcified structures that enjoined gender based fears of oppression and psychological orientations of public private binary. Prabhudas Gandhi notes that this was Gandhi's masterstroke, which brought out even privileged Muslim women like Banu Sheikh Mehtab to join satyagraha and court arrest. Even earlier, Gandhi involved women in press work and, in fact, personally taught his daughter in law Chanchal to compose types in the press so that she could draw a wage of £3 like others and become self sufficient. Gandhi's transreligious cosmopolitanism and spiritual seeking transcended institutionalized religions and ritual worship. The prototype of his famous multi faith prayer can be traced back to the prayer meeting he had started holding at Phoenix, where followers of all faith were free to participate, sing bhajans and hymns, and read from holy scriptures of different faiths. In these meetings, Gandhi gave discourses, for example, on comparison of Vaishnavism and Christianity, or read excerpts from poetic or religious texts in Gujarati, English, and Sanskrit. Then he would unpack their profound semantics for righteous living. In this meeting, Prabhudas Gandhi recalls religious texts were tempered with and transformed to shore up a politics of religious accommodation. Thus, Vaishnava Janato Tenere Kahiye often became Christian Janato Tenere Kahiye and Muslim Janato Tenere Kahiye to underline the fact that empathy with the suffering of others is a key to spiritual realization. Abdul Qadir Bawazir, whom Gandhi called his blood brother and who later moved with Gandhi to Sabarmati Ashram, moved in Phoenix with his wife and two daughters. Rauji Bhai Patel, Gandhi's associate at Phoenix, notes in his memoir, and I quote, "Sometimes Imam Sahab read out to us the verses and message of Prophet Muhammad from Holy Quran. At dawn, we would lie in bed waiting for his sky-rending azan and then get out. A true Hindu is a true Muslim, and a true Muslim is a true Hindu was the motto he never tired of repeating." Unquote. What is dubbed blasphemous today constituted a secular spiritual outlook of ashramites at Phoenix. It was an ontology of a community where interreligiosity of this kind didn't make for profanity, but spiritual maturity and merit. Reading through young Prabhudas's conversation with the Parsi gentleman Rustamji Sheth, one wonders how crucial an exercise in religious comparatism is to the cultivation of a child's moral universe. Rustamji says, and I quote, "Just as you have Janeu and evening prayer, we have Kusti and morning prayer. You wear Janeu across the shoulder, we wear the Kusti around the waist. Our religion mandates wearing of Kusti, a sadra, and a cap round the clock, even while sleeping." Unquote. Third section, Nai Talim, a new pedagogic vaccine. As a post-colonial nation, India has failed to decolonize its educational institutions from the colonial model of education that is embedded in killingly desperate cultures of cracking exams. This has led to a scenario where a student dies by suicide every hour in India. Today, neoliberal education in India struggles with the neo-fascist goals of attaining techno-scientific progress and regaining lost cultural pride. This contradiction was recently enacted in an Uttarakhand-based university where a large group of students protested their fellow students' act of praying on campus. Prabhudas Gandhi calls Gandhi's experiments in Nai Talim the greatest and the grandest of all he undertook in his life. Student-centric approach, dignity of physical labor, vocational training, multilingual education, a holistic development of mind, body, and spirit, and instilling inexhaustible ethical spiritual stamina were the hallmarks of Nai Talim that gave the students remarkable cultural self-confidence to sacrifice their lives for the cause of justice, equality, and truth. One of the earliest experiments in this regard dates to the second phase of Satyagraha struggle when Gandhi decided to billet children of the jailed Satyagrahis in the families on the settlement. The idea was, and I quote, to draw the institution of family into social service and proffer it an opportunity to evolve meaningfully. Unquote. Prabhudas's interaction with his housemate Ibrahim, his education under German teacher John Cordes, and the company of Europeans like Henry Pollack, Gabriel Isaac, a Chinese gentleman called Mr. Quinn, Parsi and Muslim businessmen like Daud Sheth, Umar Sheth, Rustamji Sheth, leads to the development of a Catholicity of mind the protesting students of Uttarakhand unfortunately know nothing of. Clearly, the object lesson in Gandhian pedagogy was an emphasis on equality. Prabhudas Gandhi tells us that his classroom was so democratic a space that no one bothered about standing up as a mark of respect to the teacher as she entered the class. Again, the education at Phoenix was completely free from examination blues, cutthroat competition, and ranking mechanisms. The author's description of the weekly tests he took at the school is worth quoting at length, and I quote, Bapuji or Maganbhai would come to the class, hand over the question papers, and leave for other work that required attention. We never knew the figure of a supervisor since no one felt the urge to cheat and appear cleverer than the others. Everyone wrote answers patiently and neatly according to his memory and understanding. We didn't get we didn't get scared in case of getting stuck somewhere or on account of failed memory. For we knew that Bapuji would help us with any lessons we fell short of. Not faring well in one subject would drive us to work harder with the hope of making up for it in the test next month. I even remember turning restless, waiting for that day when I would outperform myself. Unquote. In the school that functioned between 9 to 11, subjects like mathematics, Gita, grammar, Gujarati or Tamil or Hindi, and a bit of English were taught. The brief classroom teaching was done alongside rigorous physical labor in fields, in kitchen, printing press, and frequent trips to railway station for fetching posts. Education in Phoenix was oriented towards cultivating and reaping a fine crop of satyagrahis, a bunch of people who were capable of love and resistance, compassion and courage, critical thinking and friendship. The conduct of Ramdas Gandhi in prison during the fasts he undertook with other satyagrahis, described in chapter Ramdas the Ideal Prisoner, bears out the profound and transformative promise of Gandhian mode and manner of education. Ramdas, a callow young man of hardly 16, doesn't scapegoat his associates into fasting but undertakes it himself and soldiers on even when others fall by. He doesn't backtrack even an inch from his commitment to truth and presents an ideal of virta for all of us to emulate. Underline virta, it's a reference to Arun Shori's latest book on Veer Savarkar, Savarkar the New Icon. Therein he talks about the fast that Savarkar and his brothers undertook in Andaman jail. Last section, Indian opinion, truth in the post-truth era. Was the outbreak of COVID-19 at the dawn of post-truth era just a coincidence? Or was the latter a necessary precondition for the former? What did these two time warps have to do with the ideas of nation and truth? In this period, a part of Indian print and digital media, cheekily called Godi media, pulled off the great hack of human mind and its conception of truth. In what looked like a manufactured nationalism gone awry, the Indian media that had already sold its soul in the Faustian bargain to the state to Faustian bargain for state sponsorship, TRP, and advertisement recently betrayed the nation in the time of war. Gandhi had quite cannily anticipated the pitfalls of unchecked and unethical reliance on print and digital cultures for nation building. Realizing how important it was to keep truthful reportage and public sphere free of commercial and other vested interests, Gandhi had decided to stop carrying any advertisement in Indian opinion in 1912. Responding to Prabhudas's query, Gandhi says, I quote, printing advertisements for memory is a grave error we have committed for quite long. We have no means of ascertaining the veracity of the claims made by the shopkeepers about the quality of their products. If they are of poor quality and we still keep promoting them, it amounts to deception. Again, nothing can justify advertising things we don't use but tempt our readers to purchase. Unquote. Through this move, Gandhi not only betted for independent and educative journalism but also drew the subscriber into his ethical project. That's why he admits in his autobiography later, and I quote, Satyagraha probably would have been impossible without Indian opinion. Unquote. The weekly had impressive intellectual breadth, bracketed by an intersection of empires, races, religions, as well as black cultural traditions, local news, and satyagraha. Further, the weekly became a trigger and a locus for Gandhi to negotiate the tensions between his cosmopolitan preferences and the need to forge a national community out of Tamils, Calcutta men, Mohammedans, Hindus, Brahmins, Banyas, and unite them through a kindling of national consciousness. He achieved this feat firstly by transforming the premise of nationalism from hate to love, from suspicion to solidarity, and from otherizing to self making. In issue after issue, the weekly underlined the importance of acting ethically under the most straining circumstances and of self suffering and non violence in the pursuit of truth. Prabhudas Gandhi's brief conversation with Dutch jailer who comes to Phoenix for spending holidays during the final phase of Satyagraha stands in for the larger impact the paper had on Indian community in South Africa. That a young boy's encounter with a man in charge of the cell his father was imprisoned in doesn't excite bitterness in his heart, but instead drives him, and I quote, to seek out the humanity even of the most cruel looking person, unquote, is a plea for a humane, ethical nationalism contemporary India so badly needs. Another brilliant move to achieve the objective was to publish the newspaper in four languages simultaneously. Indian Opinion was published in Gujarati, English, Tamil, and Hindi. Gandhi remained steadfast in his commitment to multilingualism as a tool of imagining a cosmopolitan community throughout his life. In the current Indian context, where according to a recent survey, over 90% of the population in the Hindi belt have turned monolingual, recovering existential multilingualism has become unprecedentedly urgent. For every language is a worldview and thus a begetter of cosmopolitan outlook to life. Finally, I would end by saying that these are alienating times that can strip one of friends, family, language, institutions, and most importantly, truth. Torrid they may be, but certainly not unprecedented. And the best part is, the tool for blowing away the smog of untruth is at hand. Satyagraha, literally holding on to truth, a truth that propounds the unity of life, virtue of voluntary suffering, non-violence, renunciation, and unconditional love. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hemang, for your statement. I think it puts the book very much in context. It tells us what Dawn of Life is about and why it is relevant today. Before the event, we were just sitting outside and we were in conversation with a professor. And I asked him, you know, how come you've not brought any of your students? And he said something which was, I think, very powerful and poignant, and you agreed. And he said that my students are no longer interested in Gandhi. And maybe we can take off from there and also just talk about you are also a teacher and why you felt it was important and necessary to translate this book.
So a small clarification. I'm not a teacher. I used to be a teacher, but I'm an administrator now. So I'm a deputy registrar in Central University of Gujarat. So well, it's a long story how I came to this book and how I decided to translate it. But I think to cut the clutter, I would say that at least in middle class families in Gujarat even today, Gandhi does not come in a formal manner in the form of a book, right? So I don't remember having read Gandhi's autobiography any time before I was in college. But I do remember that Gandhi was a constant overarching presence in my house. So he would be around in different stories that your parents will tell you, right? So when a child is young and is afraid of darkness, the story of Ramba would be brought in. That when Gandhi was a small kid, Ramba told him that you utter Ram Nama and your fear will go away. So that is a kind of the story that every kid knows, every kid learns without reading the autobiography. Similarly, Gandhi's devotion to his parents, right? Now, this kind of emotional blackmailing also goes on all the time in families. So, my mother used to tell me, see, Gandhiji, like he never hid anything from his parents, and whenever he did, he wrote a letter of confession to his father, and his father was so sad that he started crying upon reading the letter and all that. So, I think Gandhi comes to even today. I think people with the advent of internet and WhatsApp and other social media, attempts are being made to displace Gandhi from Gujarati families. But I think even today people know a lot about Gandhi without having read him. So I think when I was in college, I read Gandhi and I was okay with him because there was so much of propaganda around discrediting Gandhi for a variety of reasons. Then in 2002, I got this job in a college, and life goes on, and you have got your own things to do. So until the lockdown, I think in 2020, when I saw those visuals on the screen about millions of migrant workers walking back home, and their condition was really tragic, and it really broke my heart. And since it was lockdown, our university was also not working, so I was at home, and I was looking around for something to read on the plight of the migrant, right? Not in India, across the globe. And someone suggested to me Giriraj Kishore's Pehla Girmitiya, right? So but since it was like we were confined to homes, I had no way to go out and purchase the book. And I think then Trideep Bhai or someone suggested that I look at this book, Prabhudas Wise. And fortunately, I got a pirated copy on internet. So I read it, and uh, I realized that there are so many issues in this book that require attention of the scholarship, attention of people at large in the country, so as to do a sort of course correction in the way Gandhi is being seen and uh, being understood at that point in time. But then lockdown was over, and like I forgot about Prabhudas Bhai's book until this New India Foundation call for applications came up, right? And like some of my friends pressed me to apply, and they suggested that this is a good opportunity. You would not be able to do this book on your own without any financial support from outside, because my job for what it is around 8 to 9 hours a day, right? And I even my weekends are full and all that. So this fellowship gave me the leeway to sort of go on a sabbatical, self-proclaimed sabbatical, because it was leave without pay basically. But then I got the time to work on the book, and that's how this book finally came about.
The book is essentially, it was serialized and it was then published, so it's short entries, and in the translation or in Dawn of Life it's very conversational, right? Like one can kind of go through it very easily. Was the original text like this, or was it in a more serious language and then you have kind of made it more conversational?
I think the genesis of the book is very interesting. Like in 1922, when non-cooperation movement flags off, all the elders in the Sabarmati ashrams are either in the jail or working in the fields, right? So Prabhudas Gandhi was a student in the national school at the Sabarmati ashram, and he was editor of this handwritten journal called Madhpudo, which is beehive. And he tells us in the preface that so many people, so many elders had promised articles for this handwritten magazine, but all of them were either away or too busy to give articles, right? So he said that I thought about filling the pages by writing about my experiences and my reminiscences of Phoenix. So, so far as the language of the book goes, Prabhudas Gandhi was a Gandhian himself, right? And Gandhi had a Gandhi had very categorical views about the kind of the language to be used in literature and other kinds of writing. So Gandhi famously said that any language which does not reach the masses is not a language worth following, right? Worth using. So the language of the original is very readable, right? There is a literary quality to it, but then it does not come out in terms of the language, but it comes out in terms of the symbolism, the imagery, the descriptions, and all that. So I don't think I had a lot of trouble rendering the book into English and make it more readable or something like that. But there were other issues and other challenges. I think we'll talk about it in a separate question, right?
You can tell us the challenges.
Challenges right now? Okay. I think I have my doctorate is in translation studies, and I have been studying the concept of translation and the practice of translation for around 25 years. And in our discipline, whenever people talk about challenges of translation, the challenges are generally reduced to linguistic challenges of translation, finding the equivalence to the words, or cultural challenges. Some of the words are not there in English language. For example, English does not have a memory of caste, right? Or English does not have an equivalent for the word like tapa and sadhana, etc., etc. So how do you translate them and all that? So I've been translating for around 15, 20 years now. And as you get into the saddle, you realize the various ways in which you engage with this kind of problems. So either you go for internal translation, you go for tactics like summarizing or paraphrasing. Sometimes you go for footnotes, right, end notes, etc., etc., or glossary. But I think the main challenge that I had was that of transgression, right? And people say, like scholars in translation studies say that translation does not have any equivalent in any of the Indian languages. It's a foreign term, and in its etymological sense of carrying one text from one language across the boundary to the other language, in that etymological sense, translation does not have any equivalent. And I agree, right? We have words like anuvad, and tarjumo, and sar, and vashantar, rupantar. But of late, I have been feeling that translation does have an equivalent in Indian language. At least in Gujarati, it has, and I call it Simo Langan, Sima Ullangan, right? So it is breaching the border, and I think this was the greatest challenge when I was deciding which book to pick up for proposing to NIF, because so far this is my personal conviction or whatever it is, but so far I have only taken up texts which are transgressive in which breach the boundaries of established discourse, set traditions, orthodoxies, and similar such things. So, in this particular book, there are multiple transgressions happening, right? And these transgressions are not happening at the level of language or culture, but they are happening at the level of ideas and discourses. Right? So, there is a full chapter on toilet cleaning in this book. It's a very long chapter, and the chapter is full of scatology. There is a lot of talk about latrines, dry latrines, negotiating shit, how to clean the latrines, how Prabhudas himself, along with Devdas Gandhi, cleaned the toilet, and how taxing the whole ordeal was to them. Now, that kind of scatology, when I was translating it, I thought for a while that this would be too much for the reader to negotiate, to engage with, right? Because our our literary tastes and sensibilities are so middle class and so upper caste at times, are so Brahminical that we cannot engage meaningfully with a text which evolves into an alternative poetics of Gramya, of Ashleel, of Chuti Samskara, etc. etc. For us, even today, the ideal poetics is which is rooted in Dhwani and Auchit. So these are different kinds of challenges, right? So this was one. There were also others like how to talk about Prabhudas's relationship with Fatima, Imam Saab's daughter, right? And should I translate it up to make it more pronounced? Because in this particular case, I was trying to make a statement. Phoenix was a sort of a laboratory where interreligious relationships were not frowned upon, right? So there is always a temptation to translate it up, do it more than required, etc., etc. And these kind of challenges, I think, are more pertinent in the field of translation studies to be explored than the challenges of language.
You mentioned the toilet chapter, and we were also talking about it before, and it is an unsettling read, right? And that's what you wanted it to be. But also, it's an important chapter in the context of Gandhi's work itself, because I think it's important to remember that Prabhudas was 12 years old when he is carrying buckets full of night soil and when he's engaged in this work. So maybe we can talk a little bit about just placing it in a larger context, and for you, why this it was important to have it in very vivid detail in a way.
Yeah, so like in my talk, I touched upon this issue that Gandhi was trying to subject the self to the experience of the other, okay, in order to bring about transformation of consciousness. And sometimes back, I was listening to Suraj Yengde in one of his interviews. He said that I bet you cannot look at your own shit for 10 seconds, and it was profoundly meaning for me. Yes, we people cannot look at our own shit for 10 seconds, right? We just turn our gaze. So he says that think about a whole cross section or a whole community of people who have been forced to negotiate shit on daily basis for thousands of years, right? So I think I wanted to talk about the politics that Gandhi had and the politics of ontological inhabitation that I just mentioned, right? Unless and until you inhabit the experience of the other, be it a Dalit body, be it a woman's body, be it anyone else, a Muslim body, once you place yourself in the place of that person, then things start looking different. And like I have personally undergone that kind of a transformation, right? And this is not a place to talk about it, but in my forthcoming book on translation theory and practice, I have at length talked about how that kind of transformation comes about when you put yourself, place yourself into the position of the other. So I think people even today believe that Gandhi was, or Gandhi was a casteist. Or let me qualify it by saying that my Dalit friends who are writers, Dalpat Chauhan and others who have translated, they still believe that Gandhi didn't made any reference to the ills of untouchability and casteism in Hind Swaraj. Through you read the whole of Hind Swaraj, and he does not mention any of this entire practice of casteism. So I think my response to that kind of argument is that Gandhi was already thinking about the the ills of casteism, the practice of untouchability, and he was seriously thinking about the different ways in which to engage with this kind of practice and how to bring about a change in the consciousness of the upper caste people. So I think that was the politics that I wanted to project while I translated that chapter. And Even in the introduction of my book, I have touched upon this issue, right? So generally translations or translators through introductions, through other paratextual devices like footnotes and others, and epilogue and prologue, try to ensure a particular kind of reading of the text. So I have tried to do that in this particular introduction of mine as well. And I hope that people will revisit their understanding of Gandhi's ideas on caste, especially before he comes back to India, right? In the South African phase, people still believe that Gandhi was out and out caste. He didn't give a damn about what was the condition of Dalits in India or elsewhere. So, if you permit, I would like to read a part of the chapter, yeah, to give you a sense of what actually went into that that whole practice of cleaning dry toilets, and how transformative it could have been for a young boy like Prabhudas, how transformative can be for all of us. We practice in our own homes and elsewhere. The first experience of toilet cleaning turned out to be extraordinarily taxing for me. A sturdy bucket, about 20 inches high, and with a holding capacity of at least 2 jerrycans of water, was full to the brim with a steaming mix of earth and excreta. Lugging that bucket load, taking care that its contents did not spill over, up to the banana plantation in the distance, tired the hell out of both of us. Devdas was relatively strong, but I wasn't equal to the task, however hard I tried. Taking a deep breath, I would lift the bucket with both hands and stagger on, only to put it back on the ground in about 10 steps. Thus, after a great deal of effort, we reached the designated vegetable bed, which had been cleaned in advance. Placing the bucket to one side, we dug a wide pit in the solid black soil. The general practice then was to empty the whole bucket into the pit in one go and be done with it. But we had to undertake a special ritual. Like the white population in South Africa, many inmates in Phoenix wiped themselves with toilet paper instead of washing with water. The bits of used tissue paper were mixed up with the other contents in the bucket. We had to pick out the bigger pieces with our bare hands. With turned up nose and breath held in, we segregated the tissues with great attention and buried them in a separate pit. As we knew, paper took about a year to decompose. Then we poured water into the bucket and began to stir the semi-liquid mixture with the help of a spade. After stirring the batter for around half an hour, once we were satisfied that all the matter, the earth, the excrement, and the tiny bits of paper had become inseparably one, we tilted the bucket, slowly poured the syrup into the pit, and spread it evenly before covering it up with a thick layer of dry earth. It was only after tamping down the earth that we felt life come back to us. From the moment we had started stirring the steaming bucket, it had begun to give off a gut wrenching stench, like the one emitted by a night old curry of rotting cabbage or radish. My head had begun to split, and I felt I would throw up in no time. Thankfully, the presence of earth in the concoction took the sting out of the stench to some extent. Otherwise, the smell of churning excrement and water would have been simply unbearable. After smoothing mud over the damp ground, we mustered the courage to open our mouths and talk. How could Bapuji tolerate this stomach turning exercise of dealing with night soil? I asked Devdas. His nose is very weak. Thus, the reek in his case becomes less oppressive. Devdas reasoned. That was the first time I learned that Bapuji's sense of smell was somewhat blunt.
Thank you for that, Hemang. I think I want to sort of move the conversation a little bit to Prabhudas's character himself, right? Because he emerges, he's always self-deprecating, and he, I think he's kind of physically weak, and he's also, I think, just less confident. And I'm just going to read a line that you have written. taking autonomous decisions, speaking confidently, taking leadership, challenging someone, such things that others take for granted, ran contrary to my temperament. In every single field of life, while discharging my responsibilities, I have been soft and spongy, like offal, someone who could never push or cross boundaries. Can you talk a little bit about him and just how he emerged to you through your translation and through this book?
Like when I was translating the book, I was sort of having a sense of deja vu because I was finding myself all the time in the character of Prabhudas. Like when he says that he didn't like mathematics and his mother used to make him sit in the kitchen while she was cooking, and the whole of the afternoon the other boys in the settlement were playing and he was not allowed to go there. And his problem with English language, his problem with articulation, and there were other kids who were smarter than him on the settlement, right? So there is this self-denigrating tone in the book throughout, and I think the book is very important to understand the child psychology also. And in the original, Kakasaheb Kalalkar has written a sort of very long introduction where he brings out the fact that the way Prabhudas was treated by his parents and especially Maganlal Gandhi, because Maganlal, his uncle, was very violent and very hot-tempered man, and there are a couple of places where Prabhudas describes how severely he used to beat him to take out his anger, right? So it's a sort of an object lesson into child psychology. And what was the question?
About just his personality, about creating him and, you know,
Yeah,
who you saw and
yeah,
what you saw.
yeah. So I think throughout the book, Prabhudas tells us that he had been a sort of a loser, and like his brothers, like his cousin and his own brother, were better than him at everything, at games, at study, etc., etc. So I don't think I had to sort of vindicate him in any way by saying that he was, because he himself vindicates himself by writing a 600 tome in a in so powerful a language in such a wonderful way, and he proves himself to be a great scholar. And in one of the chapters, he underlines the fact that when in 1913 Gandhi comes back to Phoenix and takes charge of the school, he says that had Bapuji taught us for any length of time, I would certainly have become a scholar in my own right, a scholar of history or politics, etc. etc. So I think I don't know how to see this, but even in the preface, he says that I have done nothing in my life to deserve an autobiography, right? And around the same time, there was this another guy who was writing his own biography in a self-congratulatory tone under a pseudonym called Chitragupta, right? So these are these different contradictions, and I don't know how to comment upon it. But then Prabhudas himself vindicates himself from his own admission of being inferior, being weak characters, etc.
You mentioned the uncle, and there are these very sort of, again, harsh accounts of the corporal punishment where he's like
Yeah,
Prabhudas is literally tied up to a table, etc. But then on the other hand, there is someone like Gandhi who emerges as a loving father and a loving husband. And maybe we can talk a little bit about just that aspect of his, because I think, again, like we were talking about how in the later depictions he's seen as, you know, he gave his life to the country, ignoring his
yeah,
family, right? Like
yeah,
that's another sort of
yeah, yeah.
perception. So maybe we can talk about his
Yeah. So
filial
I think
aspect.
in Gujarati, there are very few accounts of the life and the character of Maganlal Gandhi. So I think this is for the first time that people would be able to read a lot about what the man was and uh, how he was crucial to the struggle of Satyagraha that Gandhi waged in South Africa. Eventually, when he comes back to India, becomes the manager of Sabarmati Ashram. Unfortunately, he dies pretty young and all that. So Maganlal Gandhi, despite being very violent and all that, eventually in the narrative, Prabhudas tells us that he realizes that he has behaved so badly with Prabhudas. So he tells that even after going back to Sabarmati, whenever Prabhudas met Magan Bhai, the first thing that would he talk about would be the uh, he would apologize that I had been so bad to you in Phoenix, and I really repent the way I have treated you, right? So that kind of uh, sort of exoneration of Magan Bhai is also something that we come across in this book. So he's not just painted as a sort of very uh, angry man who is beating children, but as an opposite also. Similarly, in case of Gandhi, like uh, I have many friends who tell me that Gandhi was a horrible husband. He was a horrible father, and they give example of Harilal when it comes to son, and they give the example of how Gandhi had taken away all the jewels that had been gifted to Kasturba when he was coming back from South Africa to India, and like she was not willing to part with those gifts. But Gandhi was very adamant how he forced Kasturba to clean toilets, etc., etc. In this book, there are episodes, and there is a full chapter on a title. I think Kasturba at death's door. Right after returning from jail in 1913, Kasturba falls severely ill, right, and so ill that she cannot even tolerate the smallest of the sound in the settlement. Right. So throughout this period, long illness, Gandhi stands by all the time, 24/7, by Kasturba's bed. Uh, the daughter-in-laws in the house, like Kashi Ben and Santokh Ben, they reach out to Gandhi and say, "You please relax. We will take care of her." And Gandhi says, "No, until and unless I am here, I will look after Ba myself." So that kind of human side of Gandhi, uh, I think I'm not sure, but it comes out for the first time in this particular book. And this book has also got some kind of historical relevance because this was written prior to the writing of Satyagraha in South Africa and Gandhi's autobiography, right? So uh, the second aspect that I remember just now, as I'm talking about how Gandhi emerges as a human figure, uh, Gandhi used to stay in Johannesburg, and Prabhudas and the family used to stay in Phoenix, right? So sometimes on weekends or on some work, Gandhi would come to Phoenix, and all these children would surround Gandhi. They will climb on his shoulder, and they will take all kind of liberty with Gandhi, and Gandhi used to play with them. So Gandhi's house was on a certain kind of a hillock, right? And there was a slope there in the courtyard. So Prabhudas tells the reader that uh, Gandhi used to pick up all small kids and roll them down the slope, and there will be a lot of laughter, a lot of fun. So I think I hope that some of the stuff in the book will sort of encourage a revisiting of Gandhi as a father, Gandhi as a family man, Gandhi as a husband, because we come across a lot of moments in this book where we see Gandhi is really anxious about the welfare of the family. Gandhi is anxious about the institution that he has built. Like he's talking all the time about what will happen to Phoenix, right? After they leave, what will happen to the settlement? What will happen to this? No doubt the agreement, the settlement which Smuts has come about, but still he is not sure because he knows that Smuts can go back on his words and anything can happen. So that kind of sense of love, sense of compassion, sense of commitment to his family, to the Phoenix community, to the Indian community at large in South Africa is something which is unprecedented. And to my mind, he was not a horrible husband. He was not a horrible father. It's just that uh, certain moments in his life uh, forced him to take certain decisions which were in the interest of the larger politics that he was deploying in the nation. I think that is the perspective in which we have to see those.
I think I'm good. I want to leave time for questions, but just one more thing I think we should talk about is that the importance of this book is that it shows us how South Africa was sort of the early laboratory for Satyagraha, right? And of course, Gandhi has written his own book about Satyagraha in South Africa. So maybe we can just talk a little bit about that, about how Satyagraha emerges at Phoenix Farm and at Tolstoy Farm.
Yeah, so the story of Satyagraha in South Africa is available to us right from the horse's mouth, right? But I think we, like all of us, know that the South African government, the colonial government, was racist, and Gandhi becomes aware of this racism right after 1893 when he goes to South Africa. He's thrown off the train, and the initial years Gandhi spends in writing petitions and writing letters, telling them to relax the laws and to change their minds about the nature of the Indian community, right? And like in those years, he's charged of being an out and out racist also. So this book by Ashwin Desai and Ghulam Wahid, The Stretcher Bearer of Empire, uh, takes out Gandhi's references to the black community in South Africa, calling them kafir, in one of the representations that he makes to the colonial government. Right now, but the actual satyagraha, I think, kicks off in 1906, right, when the government issues this ordinance under which all the Indians have to uh, register themselves. They have to give the fingerprints of both hands, and they will have to produce the registration certificate at the call of any colonial officer at any place whatsoever, whether they are in street, whether they are in their homes, or even in the bedroom or the kitchen, right? So the satyagraha kicks off then, and I think the account of satyagraha that we get in this book is from the eye of Prabhudas Gandhi, right? So we do not get the trajectory of events. We do not get what Gandhi was doing, but in part three, most importantly, Prabhudas is talking about all the news that he is receiving from the satyagraha. That Gandhi is now in Walcrust. Now he has been detained. Now, 2000, another a batch of 2000 indentured laborers from mines and plantations have come to Newcastle and all that, right? So the sort of an understanding of satyagraha in this particular book comes in the indirect narrative, right? So Prabhudas says that we got this letter from Magan Bhai, we got this letter from Rauji Bhai, Kellen Beck wrote this letter, all that. So it's a very indirect, because the speaking voice of the book is Prabhudas himself, and that's why in the initial remarks I said that this is not a book about Gandhi; it's a book about Prabhudas Gandhi. So we do not get a lot many details about what is actually happening on the ground, but Prabhudas tells us that they have been receiving this kind of news, and there is this one. Yeah, I should speak about this wonderful chapter called "At Gandhi Maharaj." So many of the indentured laborers that have been either kicked out of the plantations, or they have left the plantations on their own, are Tamil people, right, and people from Kolkata. So once they are thrown out, they have nowhere else to go, and some of the plantation owners are paying for their blood, because their collieries and the fields are left to their own devices. So a huge chunk of these indentured laborers come to Phoenix Ashram in 1913, yes. And this is a 100-acre farm, and there's a lot of space. But then Maganlal Gandhi, Prabhudas Gandhi, Mr. West, and a couple of others are the only people who are supposed to look after this entire crowd of people, right? And Prabhudas narrates this whole episode in very interesting ways, like how as a kid he was running from pillar to post, instructing these poor people who have had nothing on their way to the settlement, and asking them to just relax, and food and water will be given to them, and how food is also in shortage. So food for these people is coming from Durban, right? And apparently there are many such places where indentured laborers have gathered, right? So Phoenix being one of them. So the food is also in short supply at times. And how I forgot the name of this character who was into the business of dispersing these food grains to people for them to cook a khichdi or something like that. And he really picks up a fight with the people who come to provide this provision, says that how are we going to cater to all these people with so less supply, right? So that chapter is also interesting. I think, does that address your question?
It does. And I think it's in the same chapter when he's actually sleeping and he thinks the ocean is approaching and it's the sound of the people.
Yeah.
And it's a very sort of memorable description because he's a child and he doesn't
Yeah.
know what's happening and he's like, oh, has the ocean's kind of reached us?
Yeah,
And it's
but
actually
it's
all
a crowd
these
of people who are
who
coming
are
and they're
entering.
murmuring and their footsteps give him a sense that it's the ocean which has come closer to him.
You have been listening to BIC Talks by Bangalore International Centre. If you liked what you heard, do follow us on social media. Keep up with our programming by signing up for our mailer on the website or leave us a review on Apple Podcast or iTunes. The crew that makes these podcasts possible is S. Sarvana Raj and Ranjit Kumar on sound supervision and production. Artwork is designed by Chandani Venkataraman of Crisscross Design Studio. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. It can also be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcentre.org. This is Sunaina Jain signing off on behalf of everyone at BIC.